Dudes, you have heard of physiological hunger, you have heard of hedonic hunger or cravings and things like that, but have you heard of sedatic hunger? Nope, no you have not, because it is new and from a conceptual paper that we are going to dive into today. I'm going to take you through not necessarily some of the main findings, but some of the key features of the paper that I think are really cool and applicable to anybody who is into fitness and or lifting and or dieting. So if you are interested in that or anything bodybuilding psychology related, hit subscribe and let's get to it. So what is sedatic hunger? The authors propose sedatic hunger as a distinct duty-oriented form of eating. Food is consumed purely to meet biological needs with no pursuit of taste, pleasure, emotional relief, or social meaning. They differentiate this from physiological or homeostatic and hedonic hunger and from other eating styles. Now, you all have heard of intuitive eating, you've heard of internally regulated. They even mentioned something called Epicurean eating, which I hadn't heard of, but it makes sense once you get the definition of it. And they offer contextual exemplars like sedotic eating whenever you are depressed, whenever you are in a highly demanding job and your food just begins to turn more and more functional. So they dive into how this appears in the real world. Let's get a little more clear. So the baseline definition for sedatic hunger is a neutral, functional drive to eat. Sensory qualities and pleasure are irrelevant, and eating is treated as a task or obligation, food as fuel. This paper is really interesting to me, and the term sedatic hunger is interesting to me because I feel like this has been around, this food as fuel mentality has been around for a really long time. And when you think about it, it becomes more interesting when you compare it to the other styles of eating. So keep in mind, food as fuel or food as function as opposed to anything else. Another interesting aspect is this food as function. The authors go into and conceptualize it by showing when it appears in situations which are completely unrelated to fitness. They talk about how this style of eating appears in people who are depressed or experiencing anhedonia. Now, with depression, you have several key features of that. One could be low mood. The authors talk about anhedonia. That's just a fancy way of saying I don't enjoy the same things that I used to. And so you'll often see that. And then obviously there is appetite irregularity. Now it's sort of a spectrum. Some people eat more when they're depressed. Some people eat less. And so as you can tell, the authors honed in on the type of people whose appetite maybe goes down, and the ones who do continue to eat and don't just sort of stop altogether, maybe stick to foods that are just palatable enough and just help keep them functioning. They also highlight the fact that individuals might lean into sedotic types of eating when there is a high amount of work pressure. So I don't know about you all, but whenever your time is eaten up by what you're doing at work. So for me, I'm doing therapy 1 day a week. I am supervising students in our clinic. I am also being a professor and teaching courses. And then I have other duties and responsibilities. Like my time is constantly consumed and eaten up. And so by having food in this role, this sedotic food as function role, helps keep me going and helps keep my cognitive load down, which helps me perform in these other areas. And that's something I don't remember reading in the paper, is that I would guess, I would hazard a guess, that eating in a sedotic way, not only is it functional, but it also provides less cognitive load or burden so that you can function and perform better in other areas of your life. So that's just a guess on my part. Last context, or one of the last contexts that they mentioned, is in the context of monotonous or restrictive diets, which completely relates to this channel and fitness in general. So under the context of monotonous or fitness-related restrictive diets, well, to give an example, I mean, as you progress along in your diet, let's say you're at a calorie pool of like 3,000, and as you begin chopping away and cutting and increasing your deficit from 3,000, let's say you get all the way down to 1,500, your food, I have no doubt, is going to get a bit more monotonous unless you just like pain and you cram in really calorie-dense food into 1,500 calories. By the pure nature of dieting, it's just going to become more sedotic as you go along. And then I anticipate the more you lean into fitness culture and lean into natural bodybuilding, whatever, your palate and the food you find palatable are going to shift because it's going to become more functional. And as you progress in your fitness and bodybuilding journeys, you are just going to naturally adopt a sedotic style of eating. Now, I imagine they also talk about a hypothetical scale that they're going to derive. So I imagine this is going to be a bunch of questions on interval and ratio scales. And so I imagine once you get a score from this, you can be high or low on sedotic eating. Most people who are into fitness, I would guess, are going to be high on sedotic eating. Most people who maintain a certain, let me rephrase that, most people who maintain a certain body composition and are into fitness are going to score somewhat highly than the general population on sedotic eating. Now, another thing they mentioned is that sedotic eating could be a state versus a trait, and essentially what that is, it's just sort of context dependent. And they had mentioned that, and this applies to fitness because you could, in a state of a diet, in the situation of dieting, become more sedotic, but they hypothesized that if you did that enough, it could eventually become a trait, and it's no longer something that you have to actually think about, and it becomes a part of who you are and what you do. So this sort of state trait possibility also exists out there, and it's not necessarily that someone is, naturally inclined to sedotic eating, but you could learn in some ways to eat that way. All right, so last thing I want to show you all this comparison chart to give you a better idea and compare it to some of the other styles of eating that the authors brought up in their paper, and to show you the differences between sort of the sensory, the emotional, and the physiological experiences while you're doing this type of eating. So number one, if you take a look, here is physiological, and the main driver is going to be energy restoration. So you want to make sure that you are fueling your system optimally. Now, sensory role, this is optional. Optional. Someone could be eating to maintain their physiological needs and also eat foods that they enjoy, but that's kind of optional. And with the emotional role, there is going to be some relief there. And that emotional role could be the satiety. You are satiating your body's needs and meeting those physiological requirements. So satiety is there. So it's need plus relief. And then you move into something like hedonic eating. I think we all know, sort of craving. It's centered around pleasure and reward. The sensory experience is going to be central. Does it taste good? Does it smell good? For those of you who don't know, does it sound good? That's why the more senses you can bring into a food, the more pleasurable it is. So chips, certain kinds of chips aren't only pleasurable because they've got a good coating and a good texture, but the auditory crunch, crunch, crunch is also going to be something that stimulates your system. There is also a comforting aspect to hedonic eating. This I would also lump in sort of emotional eating into this. That's, emotional hedonic. I would say that most individuals who use food as a coping mechanism, it is a hedonic style of eating. So it's really a soothing style. Now, just skipping down to intuitive eating. Now, for anyone who has ever, unfortunately, had disordered eating of any kind, intuitive eating is something that gets brought up, learning your body signals, trusting your body, driving pleasure from what you are eating. The sensory role is going to be pretty central here, and the emotional role is going to have this sort of positive valence to it. So it's, as you can see, a holistic approach to eating. Lastly, before sedotic, we have Epicurean, and this is aesthetic pleasure. So whenever I hear aesthetic pleasure, I just think of just like high-end Japanese sushi, because the sensory role is going to be like primary there. And if you think about your five senses, the visual system is going to be a part of that. And you just think about all the very intricate Japanese sushis. It's going to be very visually pleasing. But also, there doesn't necessarily have to be a ton of it, but the flavors are going to be expansive and there's going to be a wide range of those. So Epicurean is just pure pleasure, and it's going to have a very positive emotional role, and you are meant to sort of savor in that Epicurean way. Now, last thing, comparing sedotic to the rest of these, this is physiological need only. The sensory role is excluded. Now, I think as you start to diet and you go on and continue dieting, you try and fit foods in that are good, that taste good to you, but eventually you get deep enough into a deficit, you're just like, okay, all I can do is focus on numbers. All I can do is focus on my proteins, carbs, and fats, and I got to get rid of this sauce, and I got to get rid of this seasoning, because that is adding sort of an excess calorie burden. So just by way of dieting, you almost have to eat sedotically. The emotional role, very much excluded. So this is how you differentiate physiological from sedotic eating. In my opinion, physiologically, or eating for your physiology, you still get some relief. You can eat until you're satiated. If you're dieting for weight loss purposes or for a bodybuilding competition, you can't eat until you're satiated sometimes. Sometimes your meal is what it is, and you are eating to 80% full. And by the end of your diet, you might still be, you know, 40% hungry. So the ability for you to be satiated is just completely off the table when it comes to sedotic hunger. It's purely for function. And the stance or view of this is just like eating is a duty. It's a task. I'm only doing it for functional purposes, and nothing else really matters. Folks, I find the generation of this concept very interesting because I think sort of colloquially and in the zeitgeist, it has existed, it just hasn't had a name to it. But I am formally adopting sedotic hunger as a descriptor for purely functional eating. And so to me, what are the implications here? I think there are some implications for people who are interested in fitness and dieting in general. I think from a purely sedotic lens or through that lens, you then take the social aspect out of eating, which is something we talk about on the channel. We are social creatures. We evolved as social creatures. We evolved in communal settings, sharing food, and that is how a lot of our interactions occurred. And in a more individualistic culture and society, which, hey, bang on, I like being an individual. However, there are going to be trade-offs. So if you find yourself eating in a sedotic way, you may find that the trade-off there is you're not eating around other people so much. So I would work to identify, am I eating in this sort of style or pattern? And is it keeping me from social interactions that would be beneficial to my mood and beneficial to my overall functioning? So that's one trade-off there. And then number two, for those of us who are just creatures of habit, you eat in a specific way for so long, maybe you just stick to those foods when expanding and broadening the types of foods that you bring in could benefit you from a micronutrient perspective. So I, being a creature of habit, I could probably eat rice cakes year round. However, changing up a carbohydrate source, changing up your vegetable sources, at least every month, every couple of months is going to benefit you. For me, I try and change my meat source, try and change my vegetable source every few months just so that I am getting something slightly different. Now, I stick to those things for a while, and perhaps I'll stick to them for longer than a few months, but I think changing it up every now and then is going to benefit your body, and the little bit of cognitive burden that that's going to cost is going to be outweighed by the net benefit of getting a variety of types of foods. Last thing I'll mention, again, back to this sort of mental health perspective. You're into fitness, you're doing all the things. This is sort of the style of eating, very food as function. But if you begin to notice that you're eating the same things over and over again, and you have some low mood, and you notice that you don't enjoy the foods, but you push through it, that might be a signal that maybe you need to talk to somebody. Or maybe you need to turn your thoughts inward and see why you're not deriving any pleasure from your food whatsoever. I'm not gonna lie, food is functional for me majority of the time. But there are some distinct pleasures that I take from the types of foods that I choose. I would say on sort of this hypothetical scale, on the sedotic hunger scale, if it's a scale of 1 to 10, I'm probably like an 8. Can't wait for the scale to come out so I can see what I actually am. But if you find yourself high on sedotic hunger and then also just emotionally low or drained, get curious about it and see if you need to talk to somebody. Folks, this is a really interesting concept. I hope you'll read the paper. And I hope the authors come out with that scale because I really want to check it out. Honestly, I want to do some research with it. And if you like this episode, you'll like some of the other episodes on the channel that have to do with the psychology of physique. And so if you're interested, hit subscribe. If you're a DBZ fan, hit subscribe. If you are a Vegeta fan, especially, hit subscribe. And I'll catch you all in the next episode for something bodybuilding or bodybuilding and psychology related. Unless it's about Hussein Farhat and that entire mess. That might be the next episode. We'll see. I'll see you later.